I'd like to introduce another colleague from Esri here now, and this is Clint Brown. He's my manager's manager. He's head of the software products division, which is the division within which the Living Atlas of the World lies. So Clint, if you could come on up here. I really need to acknowledge how much he supported having this conference here on this campus. Without his support, I don't think it would have happened. He went to bat with us for us with Jack. He smoothed the way in many ways, and I want to thank him by offering him this bottle of Pinot Noir from New Zealand.
Oh, thank you.
Aptly named Map Maker.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Screw cap so we can drink it right after this. Prior to COVID, I guess we could pass it around, but not anymore. Well, welcome to Redlands and to Esri. How many of you this is your first time to visit our campus? That's incredible. That's really cool. There's a couple of places. I don't know if you've gone on a tour, but if you haven't visited, there's a GIS library that Jack set up in the very first building that we occupied on this site. The big building where our software development teams are housed is on the left side of the road. When I moved here and started here in 1983, that was a Southern California Edison equipment yard. And things have, this building was in the middle of an orange grove. Actually, it wasn't here. It took over what the orange grove was. So it's a pretty interesting place and kind of continues to grow and expand outward, especially through the pandemic. I think for a lot of people, it's really a new place. So, what's interesting about this meeting is really it's about communicating transformative thinking about cartography and geographic information, that GI science that we all think about. And the conference theme this year, ethics in mapping, is a really big deal. A few years ago at the conference, Jack was on a panel with Jim Fallows and I like getting old. I'm gonna forget. Gary Nell, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Gary. And these guys were just having a conversation about what's going on, and the topic that came up was about, kind of this lack of reality about how some people live their lives and represent things in the world. And Jack made a comment. He says he didn't think that the geospatial community would get into that approach to things, but actually I think it's something that we all have to be looking for and guarding against and proposing and demonstrating kind of best practices for how to share information. And among that, one of the things that's really interesting about what's going on these days in the geospatial communities is how much mapping is expanding. If you look at where maps were 10 years ago and before, the idea of digital maps, they were really kind of static documents, and there's many maps that are still that. These beautiful works of art, beautiful tools for communication and access to information, but that idea that map was static kind of was the world that we used to live in. These days, in this modern era with web computing, web GIS, community content, maps have now started to live and become interactive. And that idea that you can have a map display, and it's not just the map itself anymore, it's what you can reach through and kind of pull forward up out of that map. Or it's new layers that you can add, or updated information that can be added to it. And that world of interactive mapping, I think, is one of those interesting trends that I hope you're able to see a lot of that this week. ArcGIS Online has over 50 million items in it now. One of the things that's always been true about the geospatial community is everybody, in the early days, we'd wrestle with data. And we always needed somebody else's data. And that was some of the early work that everybody was doing, was kind of building the OpenGIS consortium, creating spatial data infrastructures, metadata catalogs of information for sharing. Now all those information items, or many of them, are alive. They live on the web. You can pull them into your map and you can work with them. And that kind of paradigm is shifting. So it's not that the traditional cartographic techniques are going away, but this online live mapping actually starts to shatter some of the traditional cartographic rules, like choropleth mapping versus this ability to just really interact with the data and explore it is really a new opportunity for how we deliver information. And what we've started to see is maps have become apps. It started with Google Maps in the mid-2000s, but that quickly grew. You know, the first thing, what is the first thing we all did with Google Maps? Zoomed in on our house, right? What's the second thing we did? Peeked in our neighbors' backyards. The third thing we did is we mashed something up. The first principle of GIS is this kind of integration and that ability to pull things together. And that started this trend. You know, it was all consumer maps, and people were doing things like searching for a highly rated restaurant or business, mapping their way to that business on the maps. But that pattern has emerged as becoming an incredibly powerful tool that you guys, I think, understand very deeply about and are doing things to kind of bring that to life. And it's based on your information. So if you think about those 50 million items in ArcGIS Online, that's coming from about 350,000 organizations across the planet. Probably half of those are named TEST or FOO. So that still leaves a lot of information for people to use. But what's really interesting about those items is about half of those are shared information items. In other words, if you know the URL to an information item and you have access to it, you can put it to work. So about little over 20% of those items are shared without any restriction. Everybody has access. Another up to 30% are shared by groups and communities of practice. So wildlife biologists and conservationists will share information just with each other about species at risk, but they won't open it up for everybody for obvious reasons. But that idea about this new pattern for GIS really speaks to the idea of the theme of this conference and how important and essential that is as being kind of a founding principle for what we work on and how we move forward. So, you know, some of the things that we do at Esri, I just wanted to show this one map. There's this map for something called Wildfire Aware, which is just an amazing app. It's a shame that there's not a time for a demo, but I think we'll be able to see some of those things throughout the week. The other thing that's going on here is this idea, this kind of new notion for GIS as a web platform where information is shared across real specific communities and also real general communities. We've just talked about it as, you know, this new modern interactive mapping is kind of modern GIS, just to kind of distinguish one of the big trends that's taking place. And one of the things we've done is we've developed a curriculum. It's about, I think, 20 hours of classroom activities and then follow-on exercises and tutorials for doing things. But this is really interesting. I think, Angie, I don't know if you're going to talk about this at all this week, but so this is Angela Lee, who runs our education team for higher ed and K-12. So that's really great. So I just want to give a shout out to this as something interesting as what we've been trying to work on.